New York, where at the United Nations General Assembly, where U.S. President Joe Biden is currently meeting Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They're holding these crucial talks. Let's just listen in to what Netanyahu is saying.
None more so than Iran. I appreciate, Mr. President, your continuous commitment to prevent Iran from achieving nuclear weapons capability. I think that's critical. And that shared goal of ours can be best achieved by a credible military threat, crippling sanctions, and supporting the brave men and women of Iran who despise that regime and who are our real partners for a better future. So I look forward to working with you and your team to realize the promise and confront the threat. As I said, we live in, and you said, we live in uncertain times, rapidly changing times. So I want to reassert here before you, Mr. President, that one thing is certain and one thing will never change, and that is Israel's commitment to democracy. We will continue to uphold the values that both our proud democracies cherish. And I think that working together we'll realize the promise, roll back the dangers, and bring a better future for our region and the world. We can make history. Mr. President, with your leadership, we can make history.
Together.
Together.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, guys. Mr. President, what are the Palestinians need to get? You're worried about that? Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks, Brett.
Are you worried about democracy in Israel, Mr. President?
Thanks, guys. We're down now. Thanks, guys.
This is live in New York, where the President of the United States, Joe Biden, has held a bilateral sort of meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. This was a highly anticipated meeting, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did travel with the tribulations that he is currently facing in his country over the judicial overhaul bill. And protests have been going on in Israel for quite a while now, and protests are still going on as we speak. And this is an issue that the Israeli Prime Minister was expected to discuss with the President of the United States, Joe Biden. And according to Netanyahu, he says that Israel is committed to democracy and they will fight to the end to protect the democracy of the country. Our correspondent Jody Cohen is now joining us live for this discussion. Jody Cohen, this was a highly anticipated meeting between President Joe Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It's a first of its kind this year. Probably you can tell us more about that.
Hi, Eric. Yes, so Netanyahu had to wait 9 long months for this meeting with President Biden. Now, normally when a Prime Minister of Israel comes into office, you might expect to wait a few months before that meeting. And not only was this meeting delayed, but it didn't take place in the White House as Netanyahu would have likely preferred. It's taken place on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Now, supporters of Netanyahu and detractors of President Biden would ask why it's taken so long. They say the US and Israel are long-term allies. They have a strategic partnership, and security and intelligence cooperation are reportedly at their highest levels. Now, I actually spent today looking back at 2016 when then Vice President Biden met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he called him a close friend of 30 years, saying he doesn't agree with everything, but he loves him nonetheless. And when President Biden was in Israel in July 2022, Lapid, who's now the head of the opposition, he was the Prime Minister. But in Netanyahu's remarks just now to the media, he referred to that 40-year friendship between Netanyahu and President Biden. The body language was good between the two leaders. This is a closed meeting, but they have made comments to the media. We know that on the agenda is likely to be Iran, judicial reform. We heard himself from President Biden there saying number one on his list was to talking about Saudi Arabia, and he spoke about it in the context of countering Chinese influence. And secondly, he talked about democratic values. So protesters in Israel will be pleased with that on the list coming up so high up.
Jody, what's the latest on the protests? Because as we reported that Israeli Prime Minister is traveling to the United States with a heavy in-tray because of the protests. This judicial overhaul protests have been going on for quite a while now. What's the latest on that?
So I'm actually expecting protests within the next hour or so to come past me here. And we know that protests are planned across the country. They're taking place now also. We're hearing in Tel Aviv outside the US consulate there. Some Israeli expats have been protesting wherever Netanyahu has gone so far in his trip in the US. We also know that some Israelis have traveled to the US specifically to protest. There are regular small-scale protests, I would say, following Netanyahu, whether it was in California or in with his meetings in New York. They've been protesting outside the UN building. The protesters say that we can expect surprises throughout the city during Netanyahu's visit. And the Prime Minister's office are asking if the protesters against the judicial reform are also going to be protesting against the Iranian regime, and Iran, of course, is seen as Israel's biggest external threat. The protesters' PR stunts, I have to say, are thought to be distracting, particularly the Israeli media, from Netanyahu's main message at the UN General Assembly, which he has said he would like to be, his focus is on Iran's nuclear program and aggression in the region.
All right, I've been talking to our correspondent, Jody Cohen, live from Ra'anana, Israel. Jody, thank you.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.